Queer News and Journalism is a Gay 45 original podcast published every week on Thursdays, where we come together to comment on the topics in the weekly Queer News, published by our newsletter, The Nine. Subscribe on gay45.com to get the latest news every week. Welcome back to the Deep Dive. Today, we are going to do a really necessary kind of rapid-fire global survey of what's happening right now in politics, in history, and human rights, all drawn from the latest Gay 45.
And it's messy. The stories we're looking at this week show this incredibly complex moment where you have these huge, very public setbacks.
Right.
Like the U.S. dropping World AIDS Day recognition, for example. But that's happening right alongside, rising political stars and huge new legislative pushes.
It feels like progress and persecution are hitting all at once.
Yeah.
So to make sense of it, let's add some structure. We'll start with big government decisions, the highs and the lows.
Okay.
Then we'll pivot to some pretty intense human rights issues and community tensions. And we'll wrap up by looking at health, history, and community infrastructure.
Sounds good. Let's get into it.
Okay, let's start with a story out of the USA that, well, it caused immediate controversy. The Gay 45 reported that the U.S. State Department decided not to formally recognize World AIDS Day.
Yeah, and this is a big deal. It's a break with literally decades of federal acknowledgement.
And it's the details that are so telling, isn't it?
Oh, absolutely. The reporting said staff were told not to use any government money or, official channels to mark the day.
And not even social media.
Not even social media. And the reason they gave was that, and this is a quote, awareness days were not a strategy.
Which is just, it feels so dishonest, especially when you hear that this same administration recognized other awareness days this year.
Right. And the pushback was immediate. Activist Peter Staley called it petty and hostile.
I think Representative Mark Pocan's comment really cut through, though. He said, silence is not neutrality, it is harm.
Exactly. Because it's not just a symbolic thing. The U.S. plays this massive role in fighting AIDS globally through PEPFAR. So when the State Department goes silent, it sends a message.
It's a signal.
It's a huge signal that this is no longer a top priority, and that can have very real chilling effects on funding and diplomacy down the line.
Okay, so if that's an example of political deprioritization, let's swing over to the Netherlands for a very different story.
Yeah, a much more positive one. Rob Jetten, the leader of the D66 party, just won the 2025 Thorbecke Prize.
And this prize, it's a pretty big deal, right?
It's a huge feather in his cap. It recognizes exceptional work in Parliament, so it gives him a lot of political gravitas. And, he's a real frontrunner to become the Netherlands' first openly gay prime minister.
And the reason he won is also really interesting.
It is. They praised his evolution. He basically went from being a technical speaker, very focused on policy details.
A bit dry, maybe.
Maybe, yeah. And he became this accessible and persuasive political figure. And in European politics, showing that kind of growth is a massive asset. It shows his appeal is broad.
Absolutely. Okay, so from an upward trajectory in Europe, let's talk about a major roadblock in Asia. Japan is still the only G7 nation without marriage equality.
And this latest Tokyo court ruling just reinforced that. It upheld the ban on same-sex marriage.
What was the legal reasoning behind that?
Well, the judge basically argued that the law defines marriage as being between a man and a woman, and this is the key part, that changing that definition is a job for Parliament, not for the courts.
So the court just punted. They kicked the can down the road to the politicians.
Essentially, yeah. It creates this kind of legislative paralysis. And what's frustrating for advocates is that this ruling goes against some other more progressive regional court decisions that had called the ban unconstitutional.
Right.
So it really stalls the momentum, especially when you see countries like Taiwan and Thailand moving forward.
It really shows how judicial inertia can be such a powerful barrier. Okay, let's shift gears now, segment 2. And this is where we confront some really stark human rights issues, starting with some deeply disturbing news out of Malaysia.
Yeah, this was tough to read about. Malaysian police raided 2 gay saunas in Kuala Lumpur.
And the scale of this was massive.
It was a mass arrest, 201 patrons and 7 employees. This was not a subtle operation.
And the charges are under Section 377. For our listeners who might not be familiar, what does that mean?
The penalties are they're brutal. It's a colonial-era anti-sodomy law. It carries prison sentences up to 20 years and corporal punishment.
Wow.
We're talking about laws that threaten people's freedom and their physical safety. And it's all happening in a context where the Home Minister has said that Malaysia does not recognize any LGBTQ lifestyle.
So this raid is really just political enforcement.
It's political theater. It's designed to send a very loud, very public, and very brutal message of suppression.
Okay, let's try to contrast that with some of the resilience we're seeing. Over in South Korea, the Gwangju Queer Culture Festival came back after a 3-year break.
Yes, and the return itself is just such a powerful act. They drew 2,000 people. Just showing up in those numbers after COVID and all the restrictions is a huge victory for visibility.
But that visibility came with some pretty direct opposition, didn't it?
It did. The tension was very real. There was a counter-demonstration of about 500 people from conservative and religious groups.
Oh, needed protection.
A massive police presence was needed to make sure the festival could happen. So, yes, a victory, but one that had to be actively defended.
Now let's talk about tension that's more internal. We're going to France, where a Green Party candidate, Sabrina de Canton, withdrew from a race. And the reason she gave was lesbophobia.
Yeah, and this is a really difficult intersectional story. She's alleging that officials in her own party, the Green Party, told her that her being a lesbian would be incompatible with the voters in that area.
Wait, so her own allies saw her identity as a political liability?
That's the accusation, that it would be a problem with the large Muslim and working class populations there. It raises these really tough questions about, electability versus representation inside progressive movements. Are parties prioritizing what they think will win over supporting their own candidates?
Okay, that is a lot to unpack. Let's pivot now to our third segment, where we're looking at history, health, and infrastructure. And we're starting with a really fascinating but also deeply troubling historical story from Austria.
Yeah, this is about a new biography of the painter Stephanie Hollenstein. The book is called Hitler's Queer Artist.
And the title says it all, really.
It does. She was an openly lesbian modernist painter who was also a very public and vocal supporter of Adolf Hitler.
How does the biography even begin to tackle that contradiction? An out queer person supporting a regime that would go on to persecute and murder queer people.
Well, the book doesn't try to sanitize it. It uses new archival material to just force us to confront this uncomfortable reality, that someone's identity doesn't always line up with their politics in a way that makes sense to us now.
So it complicates the narrative.
It completely complicates the narrative of queer history being just victims and heroes. It shows that people's lives and loyalties were, well, a lot messier.
That's vital to remember. Okay, a sharp turn now from historical contradictions to a massive forward-looking health plan in the UK.
A very sharp turn, yes. England's plan to end all new HIV transmissions by 2030.
This has been a policy goal for a little while, right?
Since 2019, yeah. But what's new is the health secretary, Wes Streeting, just announced a new $170 million action plan to actually make it happen. So real money behind the promise.
So what's the plan? How does that money get them to zero?
It's really a two-pronged approach. First, more testing, a lot more, especially in places like A&E departments. That's the ER for our global listeners.
Okay, early identification.
Exactly. And second, targeted support.
Yeah.
The money is specifically for helping people who are also dealing with mental health issues or addiction or poverty.
And that's so crucial, isn't it? Because those are the barriers to care.
They're huge barriers. You can't stick to a medication plan if you don't have stable housing. So this integrated approach is the only way they can really reach that goal, especially for the 100,000 people in England currently living with HIV.
So that's the power of state-led action. But at the same time, it seems like the community-led infrastructure is looking a bit shaky over there. I'm thinking about the Pride closures.
Yeah, that's the other side of the coin. We saw the news that Northern Pride, which runs Newcastle Pride, is closing down.
And that came right after Manchester Pride went into liquidation?
It did, and Manchester Pride was a financial disaster, leaving, $1.3 million in unpaid bills?
So are these two things connected? Is there a wider crisis?
It's complicated. Northern Pride is insisting their closure is a planned and positive transition. They're handing the event over to a new group. It welcomed 82,000 people this year, so it's a huge event.
So it's not a collapse in the same way?
Not in the same way, no. But the net result is that two of the biggest Pride charities in England have folded in a very short period of time. It definitely signals some kind of instability in that model.
What do you think that instability is about?
I think it just shows how incredibly demanding and financially brittle these huge events are. They rely so much on sponsorships and grants and volunteers. It seems the current charitable model is just really, really hard to sustain year after year.
So we've really covered an intense spectrum today. Political setbacks in the U.S., ambition in the Netherlands, brutality in Malaysia, and then this complex picture in the U.K.
The main takeaway from the news this week is just contrast, extreme, jarring contrast. You have breakthroughs and regressions happening at the same time. It just proves that advocacy has to be fought on every single front all at once.
It really does. Progress is definitely not guaranteed.
Yeah.
So, as you step away from this deep dive, we want to leave you with one final thought to consider.
In this climate that we've just described, this world of extremes, where should the primary effort really be focused? I mean, how much does progress really depend on big, powerful legislative action, like that 170 million HIV plan in the UK? Or does it depend more on that relentless grassroots activism like the Gwangju Festival just refusing to be silenced? And how do we build community structures that are strong enough to make sure both of those things have a stable platform to stand on?
You can also listen to any of our articles. Visit gay45.com to read more quality journalism.